has this story.
The United States of America. It's made up of 50 states, and this isn't one of them. But it is a place that decides the fate of those other 50 states, and a place with a thriving economy, where area restaurants are kept busy, and people shop at luxury grocery stores. Many call D.C. a one-industry town, with politics dominating the pulse of the economy, where the dollars are trickling down to nearby communities like Ellicott City and Columbia, Maryland, recently ranked the #2 area to live in the country by Money Magazine.
We are close to Washington, D.C., you know who lives there, and we're very close to Fort Meade, including the National Security Agency, enhanced by BRAC, that's coming in here with 3 major organizations, and soon to follow the Cyber Command, which will dwarf and probably surpass the BRAC activity.
It is a place where the vacancy rate for commercial real estate has gone down from 16% to 12%. Even residential real estate here is heading in the same direction, setting it apart from much of the rest of the country.
Howard County is not a foreclosure market. We're seeing one real estate broker reporting that his team is selling over 100 homes a month.
The unemployment rate here is about 5%. Contrast this with the country's average unemployment rate of 9.5%. Or perhaps the worst in the country, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where unemployment is at about 80%. Or with Palmdale, California, a once thriving suburb now filled with scenes like this. Homes once occupied, now empty. Once cared for lawns, overgrown. And those who remained have strong opinions about lawmakers in Washington.
I think they're very out of touch. They talk about spreading the wealth. I'd like to see them spread their wealth first.
They have a job. They don't care. They're taking care of themselves. I doubt they really are in touch with the streets or you know, Palmdale.
Between the politics in the Middle East and everything else, you know, save some money here.
Let's see them get rid of their fancy cars and their drivers.
It is no wonder, then, that a recent Gallup poll about President Obama's job approval rating found the highest numbers, 85%, in Washington, D.C., followed by Delaware and Maryland. Among the lowest approval ratings, Wyoming, West Virginia, and Alaska, where a well-known Alaskan often talks about the difference between D.C. and, quote, real America.
We believe that the best of America is not all in Washington, D.C. We believe that the best of America is in these small towns that we get to visit and in these wonderful little pockets of what I call real America.
Well, wherever this real America is, one thing is clear. It's probably not in the same place where the decisions about America are created.
Resolution of these institutions will be enormously expensive.
Voted on.
The yeas are 220, the nays are 215.
And signed into the law of the land.
The bill is passed.
Christine Frizzell, RT.
Maybe, just maybe the problem is that Congress and Washington, D.C. as a whole are thinking too big picture. And characteristically, they're actually thinking too much about numbers and a growing deficit. And while rampant government spending is a concern, at the moment, unemployed Americans have a lot more on their mind. Things like how they're going to feed their families and how they're going to keep a roof over their children's heads. So how do you tell people like that curbing spending is more important? Well, joining me is Anthony Randazzo, Director of Economic Research for the Reason Foundation. Anthony, thanks for being here.
Sure.
You yourself are not a fan of extending unemployment benefits.
Nope.
Tell me why.
There's two main reasons. One is a lot of evidence has shown that extending unemployment benefits really in aggregate extends the unemployment problem. And the second is at some point kicking the can down the road, we're just going to be creating these problems for future people. And the pain that we're suffering now, the people who are unemployed now are suffering this pain, economic pain, as a result of previous economic policies. So pushing this further and further down the road is just going to be causing more frustration for more Americans in the future.
Now, I understand, of course, there always is the argument that once you create this welfare state, certain people are going to be lazy, they're going to take advantage of it, they're going to live on it. And were we not in the Great Recession right now? We're 15 million Americans not unemployed. I think that argument would have, you know, a little more push to it. But right now, you can't say that 15 million Americans are just lazy people that don't deserve to have a job.
No, and I understand that this is really, really rough, and it's messy, and it's personal. And you're right. This is a terrible situation for the American economy to be in that makes it really hard to sit sort of from an ivory tower talking about macroeconomics and say just no unemployment benefits for anybody.
Well, you don't seem to have too much of a hard time doing it.
Well, it's, you know, it's not easy. And I, you know, have family members who are struggling with this. I have most of my family is from the Detroit area, which is not necessarily a boon for the, in terms of their economy going right now. But what I do see is I do think that we need to step back, and we need to say, yes, there are going to be people that are really hurting. So what do? Do we just cast aside everything we know about economic principles, and do we just say we're going to kick this can down the road, or do we say, all right, there are people that are hurting, what can we do? Well, we know extending unemployment benefits is just going to continue to perpetuate the problem. So we can encourage these people to say, all right, you can't find a job in your locality, maybe start to look a little bit broader. Maybe start to make some tough decisions on your own. If we as a country are going to come together and say, we're going to rise above this. We're going to have the willpower to rise above this economic problem.
I understand what you're saying there, but then what do you suggest for places like Detroit, for people that live in Detroit, for people like your family? Because that's an entire city that essentially is dead. What they lived off of, the one single industry that made that city thrive, has now disappeared. So does that mean the city should be abandoned, that everybody should just get up and move and go find work elsewhere? What happens to Detroit?
The whole city shouldn't be abandoned, but a lot of people should move. We live in the most mobile society ever in the history of mankind. It is easier today to move beyond where you are than it ever has been. That doesn't make it any easier, but Detroit is too large. Now, there are not enough jobs in the city right now for everybody there that wants them. So you can continue to stay, and you can say, I'm unemployed, I can't find a job here. Well, that's true. Maybe if you're even honestly looking for a job, and you are willing to take anything, you can't find it. Well, then just staying there and asking the federal government to pay you to stay there, that shouldn't be the attitude. We should say, well, okay, there are jobs all across the country. You can pick almost any major city other than Detroit and maybe be able to find a job.
But if the economy is so volatile right now, then why should everybody just pick up and leave and move to some city where they could lose that job in a month? I mean, you can't just assume that if you move, that you take another job, that everything is going to be okay.
And that's
because people are still being laid off right now.
And that has to be taken into consideration, because you've got a family and friends of network in a place where you've lived for your entire life. Maybe you don't want to abandon that. But if you have that, and that's the reason you don't want to abandon it, maybe we don't need to be using federal money as unemployment benefits. Because the simple fact of the matter is, nobody in my extended family is living on the street. Even if they don't have a job, one way or another, they're going to be provided for because they have a family and friend network that is supporting them.
They're the lucky ones, because a lot of Americans out there don't have a family and friend support network, people who are employed currently, people who are well off, who are going to be able to help keep them off the streets. I mean, you know, the numbers of homeless families, especially, I'm not even saying individuals, but families that now have to depend on shelters, has completely risen in the past year.
Well, there's been a rise in that, but it's not an epidemic across America. You don't walk around Washington, D.C., you don't walk around any major city and see scores of families creating ghettos like we saw during the Great Depression. Central Park has not been turned into a ghetto.
I have discussed whether we're heading into a double dip or a third depression.
But it's not yet, because America being a wealthy society means that being unemployed is completely different than being unemployed in a country like Haiti, which we've talked about before. There are resources, there are networks, and even if you don't have close family and friends where you live, there are local shelters or ministries or community offerings that can help provide a support.
I get that. But tell me this, because we're talking about failed economic policies of the past and how Americans are just going to have to get over it and they're going to have to move. Americans aren't the reason that we're in a recession right now. Wall Street is the reason that we're in a recession right now, but Wall Street got bailed out. Wall Street got bailed out, and now they're exactly the first sector to rebound and bounce back. So why is it that the Americans should pay again? They don't deserve unemployment benefits, but Wall Street deserves bailouts?
Well, I think, one, Wall Street didn't deserve a bailout. I completely agree with you. Wall Street shouldn't have been bailed out. But just because Wall Street got bailed out doesn't mean that it's logically correct to then make a mistake and bail out somewhere else. Just because we've made one economic mistake over here doesn't mean we make another economic mistake over here. But I would also push back on the contention that Wall Street is the reason that we've gotten in this place. Wall Street is a part